Origen of Alexandria, also known as Origen of Adamantius, was an early Christian scholar and theologian. In his most important work, called the First Principles, he first put forth the heretical idea of the ultimate salvation of the devil. That means that Origen already foresaw the potential healing of the Christian split that was just then happening. Jung tells us that although the figure of Christ has gathered symbols of wholeness around itself, still in regard to the opposites, good and evil, it remains one-sided. If we see the traditional figure of Christ as a parallel to the psychic manifestation of the self, then the Antichrist would correspond to the shadow of the self, namely the dark half of the human totality, which ought not to be judged too optimistically. So far as we can judge from experience, light and shadow are so evenly distributed in man's nature that his psychic totality appears to say the least of all in a somewhat murky light. The psychological concept of the self cannot omit the shadow that belongs to the light figure, for without it, this figure lacks body and humanity. In the empirical self, light and shadow form a paradoxical unity. In the Christian concept, on the other hand, the archetype is hopelessly split into two irreconcilable halves, leading ultimately to a metaphysical dualism, the final separation of the kingdom of heaven from the fiery world of the damned. Examples of this irreversible split in the Christian psyche are seen in medieval pictures of the Last Judgment. They are all essentially the same. The upper half of the picture is a scene of heaven where the choirs of the blessed surround the heavenly throne. There is light and joy and order. Then about halfway down the picture, there is a line, an absolutely polarizing line, and below it, the chaos of hell, where the damned are. It is a picture of the Christian psyche, and this is why Origen's notion of the possible salvation of the devil is so significant. He held out the idea that the split need not to be perpetual, that there might be a reconciliation sometime. As long as that split exists, everyone is going to do his best to identify with heaven. But as we know psychologically, whenever such a one-sided identification exists, it generates its opposite in the unconscious. Sooner or later, a swing over to the opposite takes place. That leads Jung to say, the coming of the Antichrist is not just a prophetic prediction, it is an inexorable psychological law. The advent of Christ represented psychologically the split of the opposites in the God image into two irreconcilable halves, Christ and Satan. This was a necessary step in the development of consciousness, but it has led to a profound one-sidedness and to a dissociated condition that now has to be corrected. The first stage in that correction, if one has been identified with the image of Christ, is an encounter with the opposite of Christ, namely Antichrist. Jung says that the same idea is alluded to in the symbol of the Savior crucified between two thieves. According to legend, one thief blessed Christ and went to heaven, and the thief on his other side, who cursed him, went to hell. The twofold movement can be seen taking place within that crucifixion scene, so that simultaneously there is a movement up and a movement down, and a containing of the conflict between those opposite movements. It foretold what William Blake finally described as the marriage of heaven and hell, in which the up and down movements become reconciled or united in a third image.